So what would you say to somebody who's scared, literally scared to death? I've met people. I talked to one of my relatives just a couple days ago, and they said, "No, we can't come out of our houses. We have to practice social distancing." This person is an athlete. They jog all the time and all that, and they maintain social distancing measures. They make sure they're washing their hands. What would you tell somebody who's absolutely 100% fearful about getting COVID-19 and becoming one of those dreaded statistics on the Johns Hopkins red line death chart, and we'll talk about how they get those numbers and confirmation, but what would you tell somebody who's freaked out about this right now?
Well, the first thing that I want to tell people is that I respect everyone making their own decision about this. And whatever your decision is, if you would like to remain scared and follow all of the recommendations that are coming forward, that certainly is your decision. I'm not going to make decisions for anyone else. But it's important to realize that when you are consumed by fear, that you're in a mode of survival, and you can only think a certain way about your own survival. And you cannot be receptive to new ideas or new ways of thinking about things when you're consumed with fear. So if you're able to take some deep breaths, take a walk, meditate, spend time with your loved ones, and you find that the fear subsides, then I would encourage you to try and look at some of the actual evidence of what's going on. And if you simply look at the mortality figures, I think that is a great place to start, because you can just disregard the error in those figures and accept the numbers put out by the World Health Organization or the CDC as true, and then compare them to other numbers put forth by those organizations, and then ask yourself, does this degree of mortality or deaths really warrant the drastic draconian measures that are being placed upon us? And then I think there's another thing that's important to look at, and this is related to what I said earlier about the masks, that if there is really a very scary and deadly disease that we can pass so readily from one to another, that we have to stay contained in our homes almost all the time, why are we allowed to go to places like the supermarket where we are in close proximity to each other and would clearly spread the disease? Or why would we be able to also go pick up takeout food at restaurants if the cooks and other personnel in the restaurants were carrying this alleged virus? Wouldn't they be spreading it to dozens and dozens of people who they're giving food to? So why is it that these measures would allow transmission of the virus, but we still have to be confined to our own areas and maintain this distance between people?
Yeah, and maybe we shouldn't give tyrants any more ideas, because I mean, if they listen to this show, they might, yeah, that's right. No more supermarkets, no more carry out. I mean, I wouldn't doubt it. That's really a good point. And another thing too that I tell a lot of people is, what's good for the government or what the government tells you to do, they don't practice themselves. When you see Trump and all the other officials, the COVID response team getting up, they're shoulder to shoulder, they're bumping arms, they're shaking hands, they're, touching their eyes, they're touching their mouth. They're not practicing the very things that they're demanding that we obey or else. So that's a really good point. Well, what is, just out of curiosity, what's the micron level of the N95 mask as opposed to this, the exosome?
Yes, I believe that the pore size is in the micron scale, which is 1/1,000,000th of a meter, whereas I said before, the virus is on the scale of 1/1,000,000th of a meter. So there's an order of magnitude difference. It's, imagine if you're a 6-foot tall individual walking through a door that is 60 feet tall. It would be no problem to get through.
Right. So you might as well not even have a mask on, basically. Right?
Absolutely. There's that.
If it was transmittable, but you're saying there's no evidence to show that it is transmittable. As a matter of fact, from what you just told me about the experiments done in 1918, there's evidence that it's not transmittable. If you can put a swab in somebody's nose who's infected with something that's making them sick, and you put it into a healthy person's nose, and what was it, 10 out of 10 times nobody got anything? then there's proof that it's not transmittable, right?
Right. It was actually 100 times, and it was 3 different experiments. So you could say it was 300 times.
Okay, so it's a 300-time failure rate for trying to transmit something that everybody see. That's the thing, Andrew. Everybody's under the assumption, and that's the fear base right there. What if everybody knew automatically in their minds right now that, hey, I can go outside, I can go to the supermarket, I can go to that restaurant and have dinner with my wife. I'm not going to get it because you can't get it like that. If everybody could just turn their mind on, that's why it's so valuable to get this kind of information out. But how do they solidify? How does that gel in their minds? How does it cement in their minds that, oh, everything that I've always thought I knew about viruses, that you could actually get it and I could die. So you're saying somebody who's got an infection can go visit their 85-year-old grandmother, or what are we saying here?
Well, I think it's important to be around your loved ones and the people you care about in this time. And I like to say that personally, I am going out there and I'm doing things and trying to live as normal a life as possible. And I'm not afraid of getting sick from anyone. However, people don't respond to me that way themselves. I mean, last weekend, I took my children for a walk around the neighborhood. It was a sunny afternoon. And 2 times this happened during a 20-minute walk, that someone was coming the opposite direction down the street. And when they got about 20 feet away from us, they put their head down to avoid eye contact and crossed the street. And I'm really afraid that this is going to be the new normal for public interactions among people, and it's going to have a devastating effect on our psychology.
Yeah.
And if you do some investigation and do some thinking, you'll quickly find out that what's going on just really doesn't make sense. And then you will be in a much better position to make a decision for yourself, and you'll feel much less fear about getting sick. You may be afraid of other things happening, but you will not worry about getting sick nearly as much. Because if you look at how many people have died from this, it is such a tiny number compared to things that we deal with every single year.
Yeah, if that number is even true, right? Which leads us to my next question. What about these confirmed cases? Already you see on the Johns Hopkins death chart, the COVID-19 death chart, we're up to over 1 million confirmed cases. How can anybody have any confidence in that number, and how do they even arrive at that number? Do you know?
Yes. I'm not sure specifically how Johns Hopkins arrives at that number. I would hope that I would assume that it would be based upon testing results. But I want to say that the test that they're using, which is a PCR test that does not measure any virus, it measures genetic material that is supposed to represent the virus, but is not the virus. That test has many, many problems with its accuracy. And even the Centers for Disease Control themselves have put out information on their website telling us that that test is problematic. And one of the things that they stated, and this is not verbatim, but it's close, is that a positive test for COVID-19 does not mean that they have the COVID-19 disease. So in other words, even if they have evidence of this alleged virus in their body, the test does not tell them if that's what is causing them to be ill or not. So for example, they could have a regular pneumonia and then have a positive test, and the pneumonia is not caused by the virus, it's caused by something else. And this is what the CDC themselves say. So, take their word for it if you like, right. Because most people would say that they're more credible and reliable than I am. And I want to also go back.
If that's true, and they trusted what they said about their own numbers, then they wouldn't even trust what they're seeing on the Johns Hopkins site, right?
Well, they
couldn't possibly be accurate.
Absolutely. And, the way that the deaths are being recorded is also problematic because there was great data put forth by the Italian government where they looked at all of the fatalities and they saw that 50% of them were in people that had not 1, not 2, but 3 serious illnesses. So this would be like someone who had, cancer and heart failure and kidney failure. So someone in that very vulnerable and frail state of health, if they got the common cold, they could succumb to their ultimate demise. So it's not really telling us that it's serious based upon that. Now, the amount of people who were healthy and did not have any serious health conditions who died in Italy, according to their government's data, was only 0.8%. And that's a really important number because most of us don't think about this, but every year, every individual has a risk of death. And right, because you know that overall the death rate is 1 per person.
Right.
So
100%.
But in the United States, the annual death rate for any general member of the public is 0.9%. So just under 1 in 100 chances of dying. Now, we know that most of those deaths actually occur in people who are older and people who are ill, but that number is averaged over the entire population. So if you say that in Italy, only 0.8% of people with the COVID illness died, that's actually lower than the death rate for any person who may be healthy.
Right.